All right, crim 5, here we go with chapter 5, which, as you can see, is titled The Public and the Police, a Consortium of Communities. So, we focused a lot on police and their roles and their relationships with the community. We've also talked a lot, at least by way of discussion questions, about what a community is. So this chapter is going to focus a lot on the different types of communities, both within and outside of the actual police agency. So we want to focus both on, again, the different types of communities that exist outside of a police agency and, again, inside of the police agency. So, if you were to think of a type of community that existed inside a police department, could you think of something, a group of people within a police agency that might consider themselves a community? And maybe you would say, well, they're all police officers, so they should all consider themselves part of the police officer community. Well, what if they're women? What if they are black? What if they are Asian? What if they are, whatever it is? What if they're Catholic? I don't know. So could they see themselves as a different, even separate subsection of a community? And the answer to that is, yeah, they could. So I'm not going to read all these to you, but many of the communities, both external and internal, which exert influence upon, are influenced by police. So, external communities. Now, we're talking about the people who are not within the police agencies. Okay, we're talking about these are communities that police agencies deal with. And there's a bunch of them, so get ready. And these are all groups of people that you have probably thought of before, but ethnic or racial minorities. Everywhere throughout the United States, there are ethnic and or racial minorities. Just let's say in the city of Fresno, for example, we happen to have, certainly at least in the Central Valley, there is a pretty large population of Hispanics in our community, and there's a lot of reasons for that. There is the farm labor community. There is our location, the weather. There's a lot of reasons for that. We also have a decent-sized Southeast Asian community here. So there are different ethnic and racial minorities who do live in the Central Valley. Learning about those communities and learning at least a little bit about their culture is something that's important for police agencies to do. And we talked about in our discussion question, why is it important to have police officers who look like our community members? It's important so that the community members can feel like they belong and like they are understood. Does that mean that a white police officer cannot relate to a black suspect, or vice versa? A black police officer can't relate to a white suspect? No, it doesn't mean that. But sometimes, can it make those relationships easier? Yeah, it can. Does discrimination exist against minority groups exist? We would be foolish to say that it doesn't. Any of us would be foolish to say that it doesn't. Discrimination exists everywhere. Is it only against minority groups? No. But does it happen? Absolutely. Police must provide services to all communities in a fair and equitable manner. Period. They also must convince the community that they're doing so. That's probably even more difficult than actually providing the service. Do you think the community believe in the police? The community in general believes in the police? It's very difficult. That's a pretty tough tough sell to make. Women are treated historically different than minority groups, not necessarily the targets of police brutality or verbal abuse. Gays and lesbians have historically had negative relations with police. There were some particularly violent run-ins with gay rights protesters. So that particular relationship hasn't always been a good one. I don't know that relationship has been strengthened at all. But that's another group within the community that needs to, that police probably need to build their relationships with. Youth. A lot of police officers don't like to deal with youth for a couple of reasons. First and foremost, and having worked at a high school, the attitude from youth is sometimes not the best. But police officers there's a lot more rules and laws that protect youth, and it becomes fairly complicated dealing with youth. But it's also dealing with youth is definitely something that can be a challenge for police. The elderly, another tough group to deal with. The poor. Again, think about each and every one of these groups in the community, excuse me, that we've talked about. They each have their own individual issues and complicated issues that police need to consider when dealing with them. Imagine on a daily basis having to figure out what the best way is to deal with each of these different types of people. And in one shift, you could bump into or have to deal with each of these different types of people and adjust your behavior accordingly to each type of person. It can become exhausting, and it can become overwhelming for one person to have to adjust their behavior based on everyone they're dealing with on a daily basis. Now, the poor sometimes, of course, can be a target, or they see themselves as a target of the police. Homeless, mentally ill. Gosh, the mentally ill are a very difficult population to deal with for police. They are unfortunately very unpredictable, or they can be. Sometimes it's very difficult to know the difference between mental illness and drug addiction, and sometimes the two go hand in hand. So a police officer's safety has to always be the number one priority. That police officer and the community's safety has to be the number one priority. And reading the intent of a mentally ill person is not easy. Not easy. So again, add that to the list of the types of people in the community that officers are dealing with. The addicted population, again, going back to the mentally ill and the addicted, these two groups are very difficult to deal with. When someone is under the influence of drugs, they're not thinking clearly, and they might be doing things that they wouldn't normally do. They're not in their right mind, very similar to a mentally ill person. The media, I'm trying to think now, was it this class? And I believe it was, where we just had the discussion question where the officer goes up and hugs the woman after the high-speed chase. I've read a lot of your responses already, and a lot of you said kind of what I was thinking. the media doesn't necessarily always seem to have good intentions when it comes to police. And maybe I'm a little bit jaded because I have worked with law enforcement, corrections, and the criminal justice system for basically my whole life. So I don't necessarily trust the media, so I apologize if any of you are looking for a career in the media. But the media is yet another group that officers have to deal with, and anyways, we'll keep moving. Religious organizations, and these are typically organizations that are going to be working alongside police to try to better the communities. The same with civic organizations. You know, think things like the Lions clubs and things like that. Public service organizations. These are all groups of nonprofits that would work toward accomplishing those community goals together with police. Sometimes political organizations will get involved. A lot of times that's going to be with the unions. And there we go, ta-da, labor unions. Most, if not all, police agencies are unionized. Police officers are typically, excuse me. Police officers are typically unionized, like I said. So, although police officers are prohibited from striking, they cannot strike because of the nature of their work. Small businesses and business organizations oftentimes would like to work with police in order to better the community as well. And other community interest organizations. And these can be things like citizen watch groups, citizen oversight groups. And these are groups of people who evaluate the way the city and police are doing their job. And sometimes they can be a very positive thing for police and sometimes not so much. Also note that it's, according to your book, a 1999 national survey, only 21% of U.S. residents had actually had contact with police. So things like one rude officer can undermine the perception of all officers. And police officers also do have contact with other government agencies, of course, emergency organizations, elected officials, things like that. Okay, so those were all. That wrapped up the external communities. Now we're moving on to the internal communities. These are the communities that form within the police agencies. So you're going to have minority officers. And I hate that word, token, but you may have your, what they call, and maybe some are treated like that, your token, you know what that means. When they treat you a certain way and say basically you're only here because you're the one black officer or you're the one Asian officer, and it's very demeaning toward officers. And it is something that has happened in the past, and I'd be willing to bet it still happens today. It should not happen. We need to be much more aware about hiring officers that look much more like our community in general. There's been substantial progress in racial and ethnic representation in law enforcement, but it hasn't been without pain, and we still have a long way to go. A long way to go. Gender, again, you know, I shouldn't say again, I don't think we've said this before, but many of you, I think, again, I can't remember if it was your class or the other one, but it was your class. What does a typical police officer look like to you? probably 80–85% of you said tall white male. It shouldn't be like that, but that is what it is like, and that's probably what I would have said as well. But there are a lot more women in law enforcement. But breaking through that barrier is something that has taken time, and it's still going to take time. Women do perform well in law enforcement. And as a female working in probation, I went out in the field with, the police almost every day during my assignment at Hoover. Women have definitely, they are as skilled as men. For me at least, my skill was different than a skill a man would have. I had the gift of gab, as I like to call it. I would walk up and immediately diffuse the situation because I wasn't intimidating and I could talk my way out of basically anything. So does that mean I couldn't be a badass and I wasn't going to pull my gun and shoot somebody if I had to? No. But women certainly have a role. And some of them are the ones that are the ones out in the front that are going to kick someone's butt. So don't get me wrong. But women have just as much business being police officers as men. So all you girls in the class, ladies in the class, even if you're super petite, I've had a lot of very petite students come up to me and say, I don't think I can do this. I think I'm too small. Do not think that. Do not think that. It is not about how small you are or big you are. It is how much heart you have. And anyways, sexual preference. Gay, lesbian officers, there are a lot more of them now than there used to be. That is a good thing. It doesn't seem to be much of an issue. I shouldn't say. I worked with a lot of gay and or lesbian officers. Never ever was made aware of it being an issue for those particular officers. So of course, many of them were my dear friends, and I worked side by side with a lot. Police unions. Whew, yes, there are certain people that you will work with that will also be very into the union, very gung-ho union, which you need some people like that. And the unions are there to protect you. Yeah, and that's it. So there are lots of different types of communities both in and out of the department.